Okay, so ready to dive into something you might not expect. Montreal City Council minutes. We're talking about the session from May 13th, 2024. And before you tune out thinking it's all dry legalese, we're treating this like urban anthropology, like we're digging for those hidden gems that tell us what's really going on in the city.
It really is remarkable when you think about it, how these minutes act as like a snapshot of city life. You know, they show us everything. I mean,
Yeah.
from major policy decisions to these tiny details about, well, you name it.
Exactly. And who has time to sift through hundreds of pages of this stuff, right? So you've done the heavy lifting for us. What jumped out at you from this meeting?
Well, right off the bat, there's this move to expand Montreal's protected green spaces.
Seems like a no-brainer, right?
You'd think so, but what's interesting here is how they're doing it. The council specifically approved adding agricultural land to Bois de la Roche Park.
Interesting. Why is that significant? It's not just adding a few more trees, right?
Exactly. It's strategic.
Mm.
See, this land links up two previously isolated sections of the park, creating a crucial corridor for wildlife. And this is where it gets cool.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
If we look back at their report on protected natural areas, it's clear this is all part of a larger strategy to boost biodiversity. They're thinking long-term, you see.
So it's not just about size, it's about creating a more robust and interconnected ecosystem.
Exactly. And that kind of thinking, that bigger picture approach, seems to be a bit of a theme in this meeting. Take public safety, for example. Councilmember Miranda brought up concerns about staffing shortages at Police Station 46 in Anjou.
I imagine that got people's attention. What was the concern there?
They're down 6 officers, apparently.
Which might not sound like a lot.
Right. But in a district like Anjou, it can have a real impact. Longer response times, and just a feeling of, well, being less safe.
Then probably contributes to that feeling some people have that things aren't being addressed quickly enough.
Precisely. And it didn't stop there. This sparked a broader conversation about safety on public transit, too.
Interesting how one issue, in this case, police staffing, becomes a gateway to a much larger conversation.
It's like this one issue became a way to talk about feeling secure in public spaces in general.
It makes you wonder, are those two topics directly related, or is this a case of one issue highlighting an existing broader anxiety?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's what makes these minutes so compelling. They give us these little glimpses into these discussions, these microcosms of larger citywide concerns.
Okay, so we've got interconnected parks and security concerns. What else was on the council's plate?
Well, housing predictably was a hot topic. Specifically, the lack of a rent registry in Montreal.
Didn't they promise that?
They did. Councilmember De Sousa really put the pressure on the Plante administration, reminding them that this was a campaign promise from back in 2021.
A broken promise is never a good look in politics. Were there any updates on when that might change?
Unfortunately, no. No concrete timeline was given. But the fact that it was brought up so forcefully in the meeting suggests it's something residents are, well, quite unhappy about.
So some tension there, for sure. Let's shift gears a bit. Were there any bright spots in this meeting? Any, feel-good moments?
Absolutely. It wasn't all budget battles and scrutiny. The council took time to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Centraide.
For those who might not know, can you tell us a bit more about what Centraide does?
They're like a central hub connecting people in need with various support services. They work with a whole network of local organizations, tackling things like poverty, social exclusion, youth support.
It sounds like they have quite a broad reach.
They do. Councilmember Black gave a really moving speech about their impact, particularly in Montreal Nord. They highlighted Centraide's work with at-risk youth, improving living conditions, promoting social inclusion. It was a good reminder that even amidst all the political back and forth, there's a lot of good being done in the city.
It's easy to get bogged down in the negative, so that's heartwarming to hear. Were there any other moments where the council came together to address social issues?
There was. There was actually a really powerful moment where the council unanimously adopted a resolution to combat anti-Semitism and hate in all its forms.
That's incredibly important, especially given, the rise in anti-Semitic incidents we've seen in recent years.
Absolutely. And the timing of this resolution was, particularly poignant. It coincided with Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day. So it really, it underscored the city's commitment to remembering the past and fighting intolerance in the present.
It's a good reminder that these meetings aren't just about budgets and bylaws, you know? They also reflect the city's values and its commitment to social justice. But speaking of budgets, let's dig into those financial details, shall we? I know those sections can seem a bit daunting to some, but I have a feeling you've unearthed some intriguing nuggets.
Oh, for sure. Always.
Hmm.
These financial reports are like treasure maps, you know? And once you know how to read them, it's amazing. They can reveal all these fascinating insights into, you know, how the city actually operates.
Okay, give us an example. What kind of treasures are we talking about here?
Well, for example, did you know that over $1 million was allocated to a company called Arborescence?
Arborescence. Okay, that sounds vaguely familiar.
They specialize in tree care and maintenance. The contract is for services in the city's larger parks. Things like emergency tree removal and, this is interesting, preventative care to help trees withstand, well, climate change.
So not just planting new trees, but investing in the long-term health of the existing ones. It makes you wonder, what's the story behind that? Was there like a particular event that prompted this?
That's a great question. It's hard to say for sure without, digging deeper, but it could be a response to those increasingly frequent extreme weather events we've been seeing.
Who could forget those intense storms last summer, trees down everywhere?
Exactly.
So maybe this is the city taking a more, how do you say, proactive approach to protecting its urban canopy?
Exactly. And it just highlights how these, seemingly mundane financial details can point to these larger trends and priorities. Now, this next one really caught my eye. The city is renewing its membership with Velo Quebec's Velo Sympathique certification program.
Velo Sympathique, that just sounds very Montreal.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
This program encourages organizations to, really promote cycling,
Yeah.
implement bike-friendly measures.
Which aligns perfectly with the city's ongoing push to expand protected bike paths. It seems like they're really putting the money where their mouth is on this one.
And speaking of money, let's talk invoices.
Okay.
This is where things get really, really granular, but trust me, it's worth it. For instance, there's an invoice from Subtilt International AV and Broadcast Design.
Okay, that does not sound very Montreal to me. What do they do?
They specialize in audiovisual systems. They were contracted to replace the audio system and scoreboards at the Claude Robillard Sports Complex.
Wow. So we're talking about everything from protecting vast urban parks to upgrading the sound system in a sports complex. The scope of these minutes is pretty incredible.
It really is. And you know what? Sometimes it's these seemingly insignificant details that can reveal the most interesting stories. Remember that sewer repair we talked about earlier?
The one for that very specific address, 9395 McCulloch Avenue. How could I forget? It's been bugging me ever since.
Well, I did a little digging, and it turns out that this address, it's right in the middle of a neighborhood that's been dealing with chronic sewer backups for years.
So what appears to be a pretty, minor repair in the minutes might actually be the culmination of years of resident complaints and infrastructure issues.
Precisely. And it makes you realize that behind every line item, every budget allocation, there's a story there, a context, a whole web of human experiences.
We've talked about green spaces, public safety, housing, even the scoreboards and sewers. What's the common thread here? What ties all these disparate elements together?
I think, well, it strikes me that we're seeing a bit of a pattern here, like a tension between those surface appearances and, what lies beneath.
What do you mean?
We'll take that park expansion, for instance. On the surface, it's simple, right?
Right.
But it's actually part of a much bigger strategy. Or that sewer repair seems minor, but speaks to years of, well, probably a whole other story. These minutes, they're full of these little mysteries,
It's like that saying, the devil is in the details. But in this case, it's not always, devilish. Sometimes it's the human story, right? The bigger picture, the why behind the what that's hiding in plain sight.
Exactly.
Which brings us back to our listener. They might be thinking, okay, fascinating stuff, but how does this help me navigate my city? What would you say to that?
I'd say it's about empowering yourself with knowledge.
Yeah.
These minutes, they're not just about what council decides. They reflect what the city is, well, grappling with, what people are concerned about, where the money's going. I mean, that's valuable information for anyone who lives here, right?
Absolutely. So if our listener wants to do their own deep dive into these minutes, where do they even begin? I imagine it can be a little intimidating.
Oh, for sure. But don't get discouraged. You don't have to read, every single page. Start by thinking about your own interest. What are you most curious about?
So, if you're passionate about, say, the environment, You might focus on sections related to parks, green spaces, sustainable development, that sort of thing.
Exactly. Or if you're concerned about housing affordability, zero in on those debates and discussions related to rent control, social housing projects, zoning changes, all of that. Those are the sections where you'll find the gold, so to speak.
So it's about being strategic, almost like a detective following a trail of clues.
Huh. I like that analogy.
Mm-hmm.
And just like a detective, don't be afraid to dig deeper. If you come across a name, a project, a budget item, whatever, that piques your interest, jot it down. You can always do a little more research later.
Now, let's be honest, these minutes can be pretty dense. Any tips for our listener on how to, navigate the more technical sections?
My advice. Don't get bogged down in the legalese. It's easy to get lost in the weeds with that stuff. Instead, focus on the big picture. Look for, key phrases, the gist of the arguments, what decisions are being made.
Skim for the highlights and then delve deeper if something grabs your attention.
Precisely. And remember, these minutes, they're just one piece of the puzzle. Don't be afraid to branch out. Consult other sources, local news articles, community blogs, advocacy group websites. You'll get a more well-rounded perspective that way.
So we've got targeted reading, supplementary research. Any other tips for our budding City Hall sleuths out there?
Let me see. Oh, pay attention to who is speaking and who isn't. Which council members are, the most vocal on certain issues? Whose concerns are being addressed? And just as important, whose perspectives seem to be missing from the conversation.
It's about reading between the lines, understanding those power dynamics at play.
Absolutely. And remember, these local issues are often connected to much larger trends and policies at the provincial or even national level, right? So, try to connect the dots.
See how the local and the global intersect. This has been, wow, really eye-opening. We started with something as, let's face it, seemingly mundane as city council minutes. And look at us. We've uncovered a wealth of insights about Montreal, its priorities, its challenges, even the forces shaping its future. It's pretty amazing when you think about it.
It really is.
Yeah.
It just goes to show the most fascinating stories can be found in the most unexpected places. You just have to know where to look.
And that knowledge, well, that's power. The power to understand, to engage, and ultimately to shape the city we want to live in. So, to our listeners, next time you see those city council minutes land in your inbox, don't just hit delete. Take a deep dive. You might be surprised by what you discover.